Thank you so much for the introduction. Before I start in this wonderful session, Hemophilia, Blessing or Curse, when I came walking in here earlier, I met up one of the three friends that I had to make during the course of this conference. And I said, I'm coming to talk here. And he said, and I gave him the topic and everything, and he said, well, definitely a blessing. Look, all these wonderful young men that you are meeting. So I have to agree with that. So just to give you a bit of background, just there is no disclosures that I have, and then just to share with you what I am going to talk to you about today. I'd like to start our story with the birth of my son, talk you through the first 3 years of life. Thereafter, life changed when we went on to prophylaxis, and we had a new normal, and we realized what our normal life was like now. And then just talk a bit about the support that we received from our hemophilia community. So my son, Ruan, was born on the 14th of March, 2006 by caesarean section. He weighed 3.95 kilograms at birth, with a length of 51 centimeters and APGAR scores of 9 and 10. So we thought, wow, how fortunate we are, what a healthy boy we have. And in South Africa, everyone, I don't know if all of you know, but in South Africa, rugby is quite big. So looking at this big, healthy boy being born, you know, everyone started dreaming of this rugby player that we are going to have. And we went back home on day 3, a very happy family, having an elder daughter, and now we were blessed with a son. But then on day 5, Ruan started vomiting after every single feed that he had. So we went back to hospital, where he was admitted, and initially no one knew what was going on with him. He was put under lights, and a lot of tests were done. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, while the pediatrician was standing next to his bed, Ruan had a seizure on the left-hand side of his body. And suddenly the realization came that he had an intracranial bleed. Immediately a CT scan was done, and Ruan was diagnosed with a massive intracranial bleed. The hospital where we were at the time did not have a pediatric ICU. And while everyone started running around in the hospital trying to organize a blood transfusion, they organized us an ambulance, and Ruan had to be transferred to the pediatric ICU of another hospital. At the hospital, he was admitted. Ruan was placed on a ventilator, and he was there for 7 days on the ventilator. The next day, on day 6, as my husband and myself were sitting outside the pediatric ICU, where we would spend the next 10 days of our life, the nurse who looked after Ruan for the day came out as her shift was finished. And she walked down the passage, and as she was walking away, she turned around and she shouted across the passageway to me, "Oh, by the way, we now know what was the cause of the intracranial bleed. Ruan has got hemophilia A." So that was the way in which we received the diagnosis of hemophilia A. And at that point, it felt as though our life came to a standstill. This was so new to us. We've never had anyone in our family that we were aware of who had hemophilia A. Being a genetic counselor, immediately everyone in the family looked to me as to what is this and what do we do? And then she also added, but don't worry, nowadays treatment is much easier than treating diabetes. And with that, she left. So we had to start coping and dealing with a diagnosis that we got in such a terrible way. Ruan was in ICU or in hospital for 10 days, and during this time, he got his factor 8 daily. And I would just like to show you 2 of the brain scans, the CT scans that we did. The first one was done just after he was admitted into a hospital. And just there in the red circle, you can see where the bleed was that Ruan had and how big the bleed was. The second scan was 6 weeks later, and I'll get to that a bit later. But you can see there, it's seen there as though the bleeding has subsided. So after 10 days, we could finally take our son back home with mixed feelings. Because I remembered when we were driving home, in South Africa, it's well known that our roads are not the best. We've got a lot of potholes and humps in the road and bumps. And I remember driving him back home and thinking every time we go over a bump, isn't he going to start bleeding again? Because I had no idea of what was going on. At the hospital where we were, there wasn't a hemophilia treatment center. So when we left hospital, we were referred to a hemophilia treatment center, and we already had an appointment. But no information as to what hemophilia really entailed was given to us before we left hospital. And we left also with the knowledge that for the next 10 days, Ruan had to get factor 8 every day. And I remember as a mother that time when we had to go to hospital every day and just pray that please find a vein on this little boy of mine. One day, sitting in our hospital waiting for the nurses and the pediatrician to get a vein on Ruan, I saw a calendar lying of one of our pathology groups, and suddenly I remembered I used to work as a representative, and I met a mother there who always told me about her son with hemophilia because she knew I was a genetic counselor. And immediately I phoned her and said, "You won't believe what happened. I now also have a son with severe hemophilia A." And she was so supportive, and she talked to me, and she asked me, "When are you going to the hemophilia treatment center?" And at our first visit, she actually came with her son, who was 9 at that time, and sat with us and talked with us and showed us that it's okay. There is life after a diagnosis with hemophilia. So for 3 months, Ruan had to have his factor 8 3 times weekly to prevent any further intracranial bleeds. And I remember we had to drive to the state hospital because there was one old nurse who was really good at finding veins in the newborns. And I had a calendar at home where I ticked off because there was 36 times that we had to do this trip. And I couldn't believe the day when those 36 days were passed and we were told, okay, we can now stop the initial prophylaxis and go over onto on-demand treatment. Suddenly it felt as though our life can take some control. We can now go ahead and try and get a more normal life. We're not going to live from one hospital trip to the next, hoping and praying that they are going to find a vein. Then at 6 weeks, we had to have another brain scan. And we went to a hospital where the radiologist didn't have any of our previous scans or really any of our history. And after the scan was done, the radiologist came out to us and he told us that it doesn't look good. It seems as though there's another intracranial bleed. I can't describe to you the anxiousness we felt and the tears I cried while we waited there to be able to see our own neurosurgeon. When we finally got to see him, he showed us the comparison between the two. And what that radiologist saw at the time was just what was left of the previous intracranial bleed that he had. But what was also told to us in the meantime was that it seemed as though Ruan had an intracranial bleed in utero already, and that there might be some brain damage. So we felt absolutely relieved that there wasn't a new bleed, but we felt quite devastating hearing that there might be some damage due to a previous intracranial bleed. So from there, we went to go and see a pediatric neurologist. And here we were given the worst case scenario. First of all, he told us Ruan would have a spastic left hand and leg. He will definitely have short-term memory problems. There will be a problem with his field of vision, and he was at a very high risk to suffer from epilepsy for the rest of our life. So once again, at 6 weeks, just as we thought we were starting to cope, it felt as though our lives stopped again. And then we started settling down, and life started feeling normal, no more prophylaxis, apart from monthly visits to the Hemophilia treatment center. Ruan didn't have any bleeds. He had a lot of bruising. And during this time, we started going for rehabilitation therapy once a month. But what I did find during this time was that I couldn't wait for him to grow up so that I can see that he is going to be okay and that he will reach his milestones. I was so happy with every milestone that he reached that I actually forgot to enjoy my child being a little baby. So then we went on life, and at around about 15 months, Ruan had his first bleed after that initial intracranial bleed. He just fell over on our very soft carpet that we had, and he fell on his elbow and he had an elbow bleed. And then things just started happening. So between April 2008 to 30 September 2008, Ruan had 16 bleeds, of which 8 bleeds was in his right ankle. And that seemed to become a target joint. At our hemophilia treatment center, prophylaxis wasn't really done on a regularly basis at that time. And we were informed that no, we can go on short-term prophylaxis because his venous access was quite difficult. So between October to November, we went on 8 weeks of secondary prophylaxis, giving factor 3 times a week, during which time there was no bleeds and things seemed okay. And then the prophylaxis was stopped again because his venous access was so difficult. And at that time, they didn't want to consider giving him a portacath. And then between 24th of November to end of March 2009, Ruan had another 14 bleeds. So just after his 3rd birthday, I went to with our visit to our HTC. I insisted that they take an X-ray of the ankle because I wanted to know what is going on and if there isn't any other option available for us as a family. I was initially told it wouldn't make a difference to the way we treat him, but finally they gave in and we had the X-ray done. We had the X-ray done on the Thursday morning. Friday, I just took the reports to the doctor. And that Monday morning, we were in hospital and Ruan received a portacath and we were finally put on prophylaxis. So our whole household went on to prophylaxis. And we soon realized prophylaxis is a joint venture between our HTC, our family, and everyone needs to buy into the concept for it to work. So the 6th of April 2009 is a day that we will always remember in our family because that's the day that our new normal started. And that's the day that we really felt that we got more control of our lives. Ruan had his surgery, and now we were on a schedule of three times a week, Ruan would receive his factor 8. We were in a fortunate position as well, having our own medical insurance that would cover the cost of doing this. So in South Africa, and probably in most countries, going on prophylaxis has a lot of implications. First of all, the cost, which is quite big in South Africa, and the majority of our patients are state patients, so they cannot really afford this. So if the veins are difficult, as was the case in Ruan, we had to get a port, and we needed to find out, first of all, whether they will pay for the prophylaxis. There was also the risk to consider, obviously the surgery, which is not a big surgery, but just thinking about it, to have the port implanted, and then, of course, the risk of getting an infection in the port. And then we had to ask ourselves whether we were ready to handle this big responsibility. Were we willing to be trained how to use the port and how to do the access? Will the infusion schedule be maintained? Because we realized going on prophylaxis was absolutely to his benefit, but it will only be to his benefit if we as a family would stick to the regimen. So we had some responsibilities. We needed to be educated and trained to properly access the port. We needed to comply with the treatment regimen. We needed to learn how to keep accurate records of all the infusions that was done. And our HTC needed to monitor our regimen. We also needed to know and learn what the symptoms of an infection was, should that happen, that we would be able to pick this up very early. And then we had to learn how to maintain proper hygienic care surrounding the port. So here's just a couple of pictures which I think all of you are mothers here with sons with hemophilia, and you guys who had hemophilia will be familiar with. The hospital visits, immobilizing a joint, everything that goes with having a bleeding disorder. And you can see, even though there's times where the joint had to be immobilized, we got a cast from our HTC that when Ruan had an ankle bleed, we put on. He got quite good at running around with the cast on. But luckily, the ankle was immobilized, and as a mom, I felt, well, I did what I could do. Because keeping a boy still with hemophilia was very difficult. I remember when Ron was still very young, and we attended our first meeting with the South African Hemophilia Foundation. And I was chatting to one of the young adults there who had hemophilia, and he used to tell me, you better get used to the idea. My mom used to say, if there's a room full of children playing, the one hanging from the light will be the one with hemophilia. And that's what we experienced. Ron wanted to do anything that all his friends and mates does. So when we went on to prophylaxis, I had a shift in my mind as well. All of you have heard the term of a helicopter mom. So this mom could change. This mom could actually become one that had a new normal, not worrying the whole time, not hovering over a son because I was worried he was going to fall and get a bleed and I would feel guilty because now he's got another bleed. So we started having a more normal family life. The next plus that was added to our family life was the fact that now we could go on holiday anywhere. Before we were on prophylaxis and did the venous access ourselves, we used to determine where we go, whether there was someone that can give factor to Ruan. If there wasn't someone, we wouldn't go there because we just wouldn't take the risk. And another thing that happened for my daughter, who during this time, I think at times it must have been very hard, always saying, please don't do that, Ruan might bleed if you bump him and he falls down the stairs, and don't do that. All of a sudden, we realized that if he irritates her, she would hit him back twice as hard as he would. And when he complained, she'd simply say, you had your factor this morning, what's your problem? So life just became so much more normal for every one of us in the family. And then, of course, the other advantage was less pain. No more bleeds, no more going to hospital, having everything checked out, and Ruan just thrived being on prophylaxis. And then, obviously, fewer trips to the hospital, just our trips that we had to do to our hemophilia treatment center. So what added to that was the fact that Ruan being in a preschool now, it gave his teachers peace of mind. Because I could go now go in when I took my son to school and say, I have a son who has hemophilia A, but don't worry, we treat him at home and he should be okay. They started to learn they don't have to send me a picture every time he fell and had a bruise to ask me, is this okay? Because Ruan had his factor every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, so for the week of school, Ruan was covered. I, as a mum, had peace of mind that when Ruan had a school outing or had play dates, he would be okay. The fewer joint bleeds meant that there was a lowering in risk for dangerous bleeds or for fewer joint bleeds, and then also for any dangerous bleeds. And that gave all of us, not just myself, but my husband, and I think to a degree even Ruan, because he realized he can actually now do more than he previously did, a big psychological benefit. There were just all the way around less worries for us as a family, and we became more relaxed and less anxious. So I just wanted to show you how well prophylaxis has worked for us. As you can see, in the first 21 months before we were on prophylaxis, Ruan had 30 bleeds. And then from 3 years up to 10 years, he had 8 suspected bleeds. And I call these suspected bleeds because Ruan is at the point now where he can't tell me anymore what a bleed feels like. And that just tells me how well our prophylaxis works. The other day when he had a pain somewhere and I said, do you think it's a bleed? He just said, Mom, I don't know what a bleed feels like anymore. And that's absolutely amazing for us. So this is why we as a family are on prophylaxis, and this is why we try and advocate and campaign as much as possible to have all those children in our country who's not as fortunate as we are on prophylaxis. We now have a son who can play around, who can be a normal boy, which is something that we always try and tell everyone we meet. Please remember, Ruan is a boy first, and he has hemophilia. So now he can run around, he can ride his bicycle and fall and have scars on his knees, just like all his mates does. He can climb, he can swim, and he can do whatever he wants to do and just be an active boy. So living an active life has come along with the prophylaxis that we were put on. But during this time, and especially just after the diagnosis of Ruan was done, and that first couple of months, that was really very, very difficult. I remember the depression I felt. I remember that I cried for days on end, and I just couldn't get myself to get up and just face life again. We had the support of the South African Hemophilia Foundation. We got to know other families that were in similar situation than we were. We got to know other parents with children the same age as Ruan. And once they were at the age where they all had their ports, the ones that were on prophylaxis, we actually saw them comparing their ports and talking about it, and they could just be normal around each other. And very important for us as mothers, we could share our stories. with other mothers who knew what we were going through and actually understood what it was like. Ruan also then realized that he isn't the only boy in the world that has hemophilia. Earlier this year at school, we were sitting at a gala, and Ruan fell the night before in the shower, and he had a terrible cut on his foot. And I was just bandaging it up, and the boy next door looked at him, and he saw the port that Ruan had. And he looked at me and he said, "Does he also have a bleeding disorder?" And suddenly we realized, wow, we actually have a boy in the same school as Ruan who also has hemophilia A. So I got to meet his mother, and his mother said she was so excited when he got home, and he told her, "Mom, you won't believe it, there's another boy with hemophilia in my school." She said because he used to think he was the only one with hemophilia. And that's what the support groups help us to do. As a community, we understand each other's pain, we understand each other's laughter and each other's tears. And then I did the PEP course, which is the Parents Empowering Parents course. And currently I'm helping coordinate the course in South Africa, which is a very great course for parents to do. So here's just a couple of pictures of our hemophilia community and the things that we do. From having training sessions where we start teaching our boys to self-infuse, this year we had a hemophilia superhero walk. And just getting everyone together and having fun together is just such an amazing thing. And we got to know so many new people that we never would have learned to know if we weren't put on this path of hemophilia. So in conclusion, from a terrible diagnosis and the way in which we got the diagnosis, from a helicopter mom who was really very scared for a child 24 hours a day, who struggled to sleep at night, what if something happens? We finally got to a place where we embraced this new, unplanned adventure that was put before us. Our hemophilia friends actually became our family, and we now share a very big family. We share each other's ups and downs, and our treatment centers is our biggest support system. We got out meeting so many new people who we never would have met if Ruan did not have hemophilia. And we are embracing all these new opportunities and all these new challenges that we get every day. And then just to end, this session says hemophilia, blessing or curse? Perhaps a bit of both. Thank you.